The Romans are like a cloud that threatens rain but passes without shedding a drop. They make great noise but lack substance. I will trample the pride of Persia underfoot as Trajan once did, and teach them that Rome's legions are not to be defied. Welcome everyone. Today we will discuss what would have happened if Persia destroyed Rome. Now, as a bit of historical context, Persia and Rome, two great civilizations that influenced everyone around them, even to this day. Their stories are very different yet similar. Rome started in 750 BC as a small city-state in Latium, and by the next 800 years grew to such an extent that they turned the entire Mediterranean into their own personal lake, starting a period of peace, prosperity, and progress called the Pax Romana. This lasted for a while, but soon Rome had to go through the crisis of the 2nd century and many others, till by the end the empire permanently split into two, the east with its capital at Constantinople and the west with its capital at Ravenna. The west would collapse in 476 AD, while the east would manage to survive for another 1,000 years, only falling in 1453 to the Ottoman Empire. Moving to Persia, the land known as Iran Shah had been home to many great empires, starting in 2700 BC in the form of Elam. But soon many Iranian tribes migrated to the Iranian plateau. These included the Persians, Medes, Bactrians, Parthians, Sogdians, Chorasmians, Alans, Hyrcanians, and the Arakacians. The most important of these for our story are the Persians and Medes. The Iranians would be under the thumb of the Assyrians for a while, till in 612 BC, the Medes, along with the Babylonians, destroyed the Assyrian capital of Nineveh and carved out an empire for themselves. They ruled for a while, till they'd get overthrown by their Persian cousins, forming the Achaemenid Empire with Cyrus the Great, who is often regarded as one of history's greatest emperors, as its founder. The Achaemenids became the greatest empire of the ancient world, and served as the father of all the Iranian peoples. But good things never last, and the Achaemenids got conquered by Alexander the Great. The Greeks would then rule Iran for more than 200 years, till the Parthians conquered it and fended off the Romans. But constant wars are bound to cause weakness, and this resulted in the Parthians to get overthrown by Ardashir I, starting the Sasanian Empire. The Sassanids would oversee a second golden age, till they'd get conquered in 651 AD by the Rashidun Caliphate, starting the second chapter in Iranian history, which isn't relevant to our story today, so we will explore it some other day. Now that we know the history, I wanted to discuss how we initiate the scenario. The Romans and Persians fought many wars, from Crassus's failed invasion of Parthia in 54 BC to the last great war of antiquity in 602 AD. The war we will focus on today will be the one in 602. Now, ever since the death of Emperor Justinian, the throne in Constantinople was occupied by a series of weak emperors, but in 582, the Anatolian general Maurice would ascend the throne. Maurice would be a capable ruler and would help guide the empire through these dark times. But the most important thing he did was grant refuge to a young Persian king known as Khosrow II in the 590s. He would give him the resources he needed to retake his throne, and Khosrow would never forget Maurice's help. In 602, Maurice would be overthrown by the Balkan general Phocas. Immediately following this, Khosrow II would invade to quote-unquote avenge Maurice, but what started out as a small-scale war became a war of total annihilation for the Romans. In 608, a rebellion started in Africa by Heraclius the Elder to remove Phocas, and by 610, his son Heraclius would defeat Phocas and become the new emperor. But while the Romans were busy with infighting, the Persians made significant gains with Egypt and Syria, falling by 617, and the Sassanids reaching all the way to the Anatolian suburb of Constantinople called Chalcedon. It seemed that the days of the Roman Empire were at an end, but then they managed to bounce back, with Heraclius reconquering much of the lost land, culminating at the Battle of Nineveh in 627 AD, after which peace was finally established in 628 after Khosrow signed the peace deal, an action which would cost him his life. This bloody civil war exhausted both sides, with the Sassanids falling into civil war. This would end up with the Islamic Caliphate conquering Persia and much of Rome. and the rest is history. But what if Khosrow had more luck and actually won? Today we'll discuss that, but before starting this scenario, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel, as only 5% of you are subscribed. Your support means the world to me, and I would greatly appreciate it. Share your thoughts in the comments down below, but without any further ado, let's start the scenario. So what changes do we need to make to ensure that Khosrow succeeds? Well, the first one would be more luck. Khosrow would have more early success, which can be mostly attributed to the sheer incompetence of Phocas, leading to Khosrow reaching all the way to Antioch by 608. Also around this time, Heraclius the Elder would rebel against Phocas, starting a civil war in the Byzantine Empire. This civil war also happened in our own timeline, and it lasted for 2 years, and it ended in success with Phocas being ousted and Heraclius' son, who was also named Heraclius, becoming the new emperor. But here we will have it last even longer, ending only in 612 with the rebellion failing and Heraclius the Elder being killed. This would result in his son to return to the Exarchate of Africa, which would basically secede from the rest of the Byzantine Empire, becoming its own strong Mediterranean kingdom centered around the city of Carthage. The Persians would use this time to conquer Syria, and by 615 would conquer Egypt. In 617, Khosrow would send an offer to the Khagan of the Avar Khaganate to lay a joint siege on the city of Constantinople, which he would gladly accept, as Khosrow promised him all the Balkan lands of the Byzantine Empire. This also happened in our own timeline. In 626, the Avars and Sassanids laid a joint siege to the city of Constantinople, but the Sassanids only sent about 7,000 men to assist the siege, as Khosrow was busy in the east with Heraclius, dooming the siege to failure. Here that wouldn't happen. Instead, by 626, the entire Persian army would arrive. A force of almost 70,000 men would lay siege to the city, with the Avars sending almost 50,000 troops. They'd lay siege to both sides of the city. The powerful Byzantine navy would block all communication between both sides, leading to the siege lasting for a long time. But by the end of the next year, Constantinople, the greatest city in Europe, would fall. Khosrow II would order that the city be razed to the ground. This would be revenge for the 5 times that Rome raided and sacked the Persian capital of Ctesiphon. Sassanid and Avar troops would sack the city, destroying most buildings and looting any and everyone. The Hagia Sophia and the imperial palace would be destroyed. The city would be depopulated, with some of its population being massacred, while the rest would be sold into slavery. Khosrow would sign a peace deal with the rest of the empire, ending the war in 628 AD. The Byzantine navy would retreat to different areas and islands like Cyprus, Crete, Achaia, Venice, and Rome, forming independent kingdoms, while Sicily and some other islands would be taken up by the Kingdom of Africa. The Avars would take most of the Balkans, which in theory would be theirs, but would actually be ruled by the various Slavic tribes, while Persia would reach its zenith, gaining all the lands once held by the Achaemenid Empire. Khosrow II would be welcomed by the Christian populations of Syria and Egypt, who followed different versions of Christianity which were condemned as heretical by the Byzantines. Rebellions would occur mostly in Anatolia among the Greeks, who would be persecuted by the Persians. There wouldn't be any persecutions against the Nestorian Christians though. Such persecutions were once common in the past, but mostly thanks to emperors who were on good terms with the Magi, the Zoroastrian clergy of the empire. Khosrow II was disliked by the Magi, so he would be mostly tolerant to the Christians. The following years would be spent on rebuilding, but in 633 AD, a new threat would arise from the south, the Rashidun Caliphate. Following the end of the Ridda Wars, the Rashidun Caliphate would look northwards for expansion. At first, small raiding armies would be sent into Mesopotamia and Palestine, which would be followed by an invasion in 2 parts, with Khalid ibn al-Walid leading the charge into the Levant, while Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas leads the charge into Mesopotamia. In a year, Khalid would manage to conquer the Levant, while Sa'd would make great gains in Mesopotamia. In 635, Ctesiphon and later Mesopotamia would fall to the Caliphate, with the Sassanids moving their capital to Yazd. Khosrow II would see all the progress that he had made been for nothing, as the Caliphate soon takes Azerbaijan, cutting the Persian Empire in 3. Khosrow II after this would die in 637 as a weak and depressed old man. Following on their success, The Caliphate would take Egypt in 642. The Arab conquest of Egypt here would take some time though, as the local Coptic population would actually support the Sassanid garrisons placed in the province. But in the end, without any external support, the Sassanid garrison in Egypt would surrender, with the region falling to the Arabs. The Arabs would then set their sights on Anatolia, as the region would be in complete chaos after being cut off from the rest of the Sassanid Empire. Sassanid Anatolia would see large revolts even before the Islamic conquests, as the oppressed Greeks would occasionally rise up against the Persians to secure their independence. Here this would be even more frequent, as places like Ionia, Pontus, and Cappadocia would be in open rebellion. The rulers of these rebellious provinces would look towards the Caliphate for help, and Caliph Umar, seeing this as a good opportunity to expand, would invade. The fighting would take a while, but with low Persian morale and support from rebel leaders, the region would be completely conquered by 647. Around this time, the Persians, as revenge for all these losses, would manage to assassinate Caliph Umar. His place would be taken by Uthman, who would start heavily investing in the navy to go on expeditions in the Mediterranean. By 651, the Arabs would attempt to conquer Iran, but would face the Sassanids under Shah Buran, the daughter of Khosrow II, at the fortress of Nahavand. The battle would be extremely hard, but in the end the Persians would defeat the Arabs in a decisive victory. Shah Buran would be killed in the battle, with her being celebrated as a martyr. Uthman, after this, realizing that Persia wasn't worth the trouble, would sign a truce with the Persians, ending all hostilities between both sides. The Caliphate would then focus its efforts west and into the Mediterranean, which wouldn't be hard due to the power vacuum left by Rome. The Arabs would conquer Cyprus and Crete in 653, encroaching further into the Balkans. Also around this time, the Caliphate would come into conflict with the Kingdom of Africa, ruled by Heraclius' grandson Constans II. The two would fight a war, which would end up with the Muslims, with Berber support, taking Libya and parts of Tunis. But before the Caliphate could finish the job, Uthman gets assassinated and the first fitna, the Islamic Civil War, starts. It would go mostly the same, with Persia's role being taken by Anatolia. Speaking of Persia, the Sassanids after the truce would end up in a power struggle. In the end, the dynasty would be overthrown and replaced by a northern dynasty called the House of Kiran. So, due to this, Iran would stay out of the first fitna. During the second fitna, the Karanids would start construction on fortifications and fortresses along the Zagros mountains to better defend themselves against the Umayyad Caliphate, creating a giant wall to defend themselves. But much like the Karanids, you too can defend something valuable to you thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Casetopia. Casetopia offers a wide range of selection on various phone cases that are both stunning and extremely durable, protecting the back of your phone while also having a sleek and modern design. Casetopia is offering a discount of 20% on all their products, so now is the best time to get them. Just visit the link in the description and use code STY018 on your purchase. It would help out the channel and would make my day. But let's get back to the scenario. So Persia would be in the process of rebuilding, while the Umayyads go on a conquest spree across the Mediterranean. Firstly, they'd reconquer Libya from Africa and would go further, taking Carthage and ending the Kingdom of Africa, seizing their Mediterranean possessions. They'd then subdue the Moors and launch an invasion of Iberia, taking the entire peninsula by 684 AD. They'd then conquer parts of southern Italy from the squabbling kingdoms, only being stopped at the gates of Rome by a Lombard army, who would conquer the city instead. In the Caucasus, the Arabs would defeat the Khazars so badly that the Bulgars don't leave the region. Instead, they become allied to the Umayyads, slowly but surely converting to Islam. These lands in the western steppe would mostly be used to gain slaves, which would result in them taking Central Asia's place. This would result in Islam to spread to this region first. In the Balkans, the Arabs would defeat the petty kingdoms and small tribes, reaching all the way to Croatia, only being stopped by an Avar Lombard army. Finally, the Umayyads would actually win the Battle of Tours, leading to them going further north, taking Aquitaine and gaining major concessions from the Franks. This would be the peak in power of the Umayyad Caliphate, but afterwards it would all go downhill from here. The non-Arab nobility of Anatolia and the Balkans would become increasingly frustrated by the Arab supremacist Umayyads in Damascus. This would lead to discontent growing, which would result in the Abbasid Revolution. which would result in the collapse of the Umayyad Caliphate. In the aftermath, Ifriqiya, Egypt, and Iberia would break free from the new caliphate, who after a few years would reconquer most of their lost lands. In our own timeline, the Abbasid power base was centered mostly in Persia, but with Iran Shah not being conquered here, their power base would be in the Balkans and Anatolia. Originally, the Abbasid capital would be in Thessaloniki during the early years of the caliphate, but during the reign of Caliph al-Mansur, a new capital would be constructed over the remains of Constantinople. It would be called Kefalissima, being constructed in the Greek Hippodamian style. The city would become the center of the Islamic Golden Age, with great contributions in science and arts being made by Greek, Arab, Syriac, and even Slavic scientists, philosophers, and astronomers. Greek influence would be felt all across the caliphate, but soon, much like in our own timeline, they would face internal strife, corruption, and clashes between the nobility, resulting in their weakening. Moving to the west, most of Charlemagne's conquests would go the same, but with a stronger caliphate on his back door, he'd expand less south and more north. Without the presence of the Byzantines, there really wouldn't be anyone left to challenge his claim to the title of Roman Emperor, with the Frankish Empire and its successor states, mostly the HRE, becoming the successors of Rome. Most of Western Europe would be the same across the 8 and 900s, decentralizing and going feudal. The Reconquista would never happen, as Asturias without any outside help would get overrun by the much stronger Umayyads in Cordoba, though they'd also fragment and get weak. Moving to the east, Bulgaria, or Bulgaria as it would be called here, would take advantage of the weakened Khazars and conquer most of the western steppes with caliphate aid. The Kievan Rus, initially after their founding, would be the rivals of the caliphate and Bulgars, but slowly relations between the two would get warmer, with the Rus eventually converting to Islam by the end of the 900s. The Poles would still convert to Catholicism here and would be the bastion of the faith in the east against Rus and Bulgar attacks. The Hungarians would also proceed mostly the same, converting to Catholicism, but with Croatia being a Muslim emirate here, they would never unite with Hungary. Now that we're done with the Christian and Muslim worlds, let's go east to the star of the video, Iran Shah. The history of Iran would be fundamentally changed. For starters, Zoroastrianism would remain the prominent religion. The religion believed in a constant battle between good and evil, and was the first monotheistic religion of the world. The deity of good, also known as Ahura Mazda, was the main god, with the deity of evil being known as Angra Manu. But in the south and the former Sasanian court, there was a sect that also believed in a third deity called Zirvan, who was the master of time. In places like Afghanistan and the Oxus River, Buddhism would remain the prominent religion, with the high priest of the Balkh monastery becoming a central figure there. Islam would also not spread to northern India. Instead, most of it would follow Hinduism, Buddhism, or some folk religions. Islam would still spread to the East Indies, though, as Arab traders would bring the religion there. Persia and the wider Iranian world wouldn't be considered a part of the Middle East, but instead Central Asia, becoming a smaller India of sorts. Economically, things like cotton and coffee would never come to Persia here, as they were brought by Arab traders from Yemen, so there would be no Persian rugs in this timeline. Politically, I do predict that somewhere around the 800s, the Kharanids collapse into a series of small states, which happened pretty often in Iranian history. By the end of the 800s though, most of the east would be united under the Safarid dynasty, with them uniting Iran by the 900s. The Safarids would oversee a Persian renaissance in science, art, and literature from their capital at Zaranj. They'd also soon start expanding. Their first targets would be the Emirate of Khuzestan and Shirvan, which would be conquered by the late 900s, with Iran regaining some of its former glory. In the Balkans, after a few Greek emirates, the Slavs under Kaiser Maxim Akhmadovich would conquer a large portion of the Balkans and Anatolia. One thing I forgot to mention here is that Georgia and Armenia would convert to Islam. Why, you may ask? Well, in our timeline, they evaded Islamization because the Arabs preferred to keep them as client states against the nomads of the western steppe. But with the nomads being subdued here, they would convert to Islam, but still retain a lot of cultural autonomy from the Arabs, Greeks, and Slavs. Moving back to Persia, they would reach the peak of their power in the 1000s, with Shahanshah Jamshid conquering Mesopotamia, but after his death, the empire would weaken, and first lose its eastern holdings to the Ghaznavids. Then a nomadic group known as the Seljuks would overrun the Iranian plateau, allowing Mesopotamia, Mosul, and Azerbaijan to break off, while the nomads formed their own nomadic empire known as the Seljuk Khanate. This conquest would change Iran as Turks began settling in the north of the region, bringing their religion Tengrism with them. The Seljuks soon looked outward to the rest of the Middle East. Only time will tell what the future will be like. But that's it for today's video. Phew, this was one of my more interesting scenarios. If you all want a part 2 focusing on the Turkic migrations and later Mongol conquests, please let me know in the comments down below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments down below. But for now, this was Alternate History Chronicles, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.